Hey everybody, I started this a few minutes early. I did not mean to be online right now. Hey everybody, it's Charlotte and it's Wednesday and we're back for some more War and Peace story time. And I'm just gonna let some people know. That's awkward. Hey everybody. We're live and curiouser and curiouser. Dang it. Oh. I did this wrong, but that's all right. I'm online a few minutes early. So I've got the live chat up and Hey, if you're online for War and Peace, feel free to say hi in the live chat. I'm just getting it all set up. I accidentally started the live stream early. So I gotta go back out and start back in again, but I'm not going to. So here we are. I hope everyone is having a good week so far. Staying safe out there. I know a lot of places are in phase 1 of reopening post-COVID, or like not necessarily post-COVID because it's still out there, but definitely like as we're working through the whole COVID thing. So I hope you're staying safe. For people who are out protesting, I hope you're staying safe. And be checking out the links that I post about ways to get involved. And take a moment to support small businesses and minority-owned businesses. Like the War and Peace book, I know you can get it at the Strand versus ordering it on Amazon. You can get it at the Strand, which is a local bookshop in New York City. Or there's a list of other minority-owned businesses, including bookstores, that someone online's been putting together. So I will add that to the chat as well, or the description of the video after we get going. So without more further ado, let's just jump back in. Today we're doing volume 2, part 2, section 13 through 17. And it's, we're back with Prince Andre and Pierre and their discussions as they head to Bald Hills, Pierre's father's estate. Pierre met up with Prince Andre at Prince Andre's estate, or the estate that he's currently in the process of building. And they've been discussing life and the meaning of life and afterlife and God and spirituality, and also Pierre's recent joining of the Masons. So let's jump back in with them, and we'll begin with section 13. It was already dusk when Prince Andre and Pierre drove up to the main entrance of the house at Bald Hills. As they were driving up, Prince Andre, smiling, drew Pierre's attention to the bustling that was going on by the back porch. A bent old woman with a bundle on her back and a short man, dressed in black with long hair, seeing the carriage drive up, went running back to the gate. Two women ran out after them, and all four, glancing at the carriage, ran fearfully up the back porch. "Those are Masha's people of God," said Prince Andre. "They took us for father, and this is the only thing in which she doesn't obey him. He orders those wanderers driven away, but she receives them." "But what are these people of God?" asked Pierre. Prince Andre had no time to answer him. The servants came out to meet them, and he asked them where the old prince was and how soon they expected him. The old prince was still in town, and he was expected at any moment. Prince Andre took Pierre to his rooms, which always awaited him in perfect order in his father's house, and went himself to the nursery. "Let's go to my sister," said Prince Andrei, returning to Pierre. "I haven't seen her yet. She's hiding now and sitting with her people of God. It will serve her right. She'll get embarrassed, but you will see the people of God. C'est curieux, ma parole." Qu'est-ce qu'elle? Qu'est-ce que people of God? Asked Pierre. Which is, what are the people of God? You'll see. Princess Maria, indeed, became embarrassed and covered with red spots when they came to her. In her cozy room with icon lamps before the icons, a young boy with a long nose and long hair and in a monk's cassock was sitting on the sofa beside her at the samovar. In an armchair next to them sat a thin, wrinkled old woman with a meek expression on her childlike face. "André, pourquoi ne pas m'avoir prévenu?" she said in mild reproach. "Why didn't you warn me?" Standing in front of her wanderers like a hen in front of her chicks. "Charmée de vous voir. Je suis très contente de vous voir." "Delighted to see you. I'm always pleased to see you," she said to Pierre as he was kissing her hand. She had known him as a child, and now his friendship with André, the misfortune with his wife, and above all his kind, simple face, disposed her towards him. She looked at him with her beautiful, luminous eyes and seemed to be saying, "I like you very much, but please don't laugh at my people." Having exchanged the first phrases of greeting, they sat down. "Ah, Ivanushka's here too," said Prince Andrei, indicating the young wanderer with his smile. "André," Princess Maria said pleadingly. "Il faut que vous sachiez que c'est une femme," André said to Pierre. "André, en nom de Dieu," Princess Maria repeated. It was clear that Prince Andrei's mocking attitude towards the wanderers and Princess Maria's useless intercession for them were habitual, well-established relations between them. "Mais, ma bonne amie," said Prince André, "vous devrez au contraire m'être reconnaissance de que explique à Pierre votre intimité avec ce jeune homme." "Vraiment?" said Pierre, studying the face of Ivanushka curiously and gravely through his spectacles, for which Princess Maria was especially grateful to him. Realizing that they were talking about him, Ivanushka looked around at them all with cunning eyes. Princess Maria's embarrassment for her people was totally unnecessary. They were not in the least intimidated. The little old woman, her eyes lowered and casting sidelong glances at the newcomers, turned her teacup bottom up on the saucer and placed the nibbled piece of sugar beside it, sat calmly and motionless in her chair, waiting to be offered more tea. Ivanushka, sipping from the saucer, looked at the young men from under his brows with his sly, feminine eyes. "Where have you been? To Kiev?" Prince Andrei asked the old woman. "So I have, good sir," the old woman replied garrulously. "Just before Christmas I was deemed worthy to partake of the holy heavenly mysteries with the monks there, and now I'm coming from Kolyazin, where a great blessing has been revealed." "And Ivanushka has come with you?" "I've come on my own, my provider," Ivanushka said, trying to speak in a bass voice. "I met Pelageyushka only in Yoknovo." Pelageyushka interrupted her companion. She obviously wanted to tell what she had seen. "And Kolyazin, good sir, a great blessing has been revealed." "What, new relics?" asked Prince Andrei. "Enough, Andrei," said Princess Maria. "Don't tell him, Pelageyushka. And what's wrong, good lady? Why shouldn't I tell him? I like him. He's kind. God's chosen. He gave me 10 rubles, my benefactor, I remember. When I was in Kiev, Kirusha, a holy fool, truly a man of God, he goes barefoot winter and summer. Why do you go about where you don't belong, he says. Go to Kolyazin. There's a miracle-working icon revealed, the Holy Mother of God. At that moment, I took leave of the monks and went. Everyone was silent. Only the wanderer woman spoke in a measured voice, drawing in her breath. I came, my good sir, and people tell me a great blessing has been revealed. The Holy Mother of God has blessed oil dripping from her cheeks. Well, all right, you can tell it later, Princess Maria said, blushing. Allow me to ask her, said Pierre. Did you see it for yourself? He asked. Of course, good sir, I was deemed worthy. There was a radiance on her face like a heavenly light, and it dripped from the Holy Mother's cheeks, just dripped and dripped. But it's a trick, Pierre said naively, having listened attentively to the wanderer woman. Ah, good sir, what are you saying? Pelageyushka said in horror, turning to Princess Marya for defense. They tricked the people, he repeated. Lord Jesus Christ, the wanderer woman said, crossing herself. Don't say it, good sir. There was this one general who didn't believe it and said, the monks are tricking you, and as soon as he said it, he went blind. And he had a dream that the Mother of God of the caves came to him and says, believe in me, and I will heal you. So he started begging, take me to her, take me. It's a real truth, I'm telling you. I saw it myself. They brought him, blind as he was, straight to her. He goes to her, falls down, and says, heal me. I'll give you everything the Tsar has bestowed on me. I saw the medal myself, a star, set in the icon. So he got his sight back. It's a sin to speak as you do. God will punish you, she addressed Pierre didactically. How did the star get into the icon? Asked Pierre. So the Mother of God has been promoted to general, said Prince Andrei, smiling. Pelageyushka suddenly turned pale and clasped her hands. Good sir, it's a sin, a sin. You have a son, she begged, her pallor suddenly turning to bright red. Good sir, what have you said? God forgive you. She crossed herself. Lord, forgive him. Good lady, what is this? She turned to Princess Marya. She got up, and all but in tears began packing her bag. She was clearly frightened and sorry for the one who had said it, and ashamed that she had received the benefactions in a house where such things could be said, and sorry that she now had to be deprived of those benefactions. Well, what on earth did you do that for? Said Princess Marya. Why did you come to me? No, I was joking, Pelageyushka, said Pierre. Princesse ma parole, je n'ai pas voulu vous l'offenser. I just said it. Never mind. I meant it as a joke, he said, smiling timidly and wishing to smooth over his guilt. Pelageyushka paused mistrustfully, but Pierre's face showed such sincere regret, and Prince Andrei looked so meekly and gravely now at Pelageyushka, now at Pierre, that she gradually calmed down. Section 14. The wanderer woman calmed down and, urged to go on, spent a long time telling about Father Amphilochi, whose life was so holy that his dear hands smelled of incense, and how, during her last pilgrimage to Kiev, some monks she knew gave her the keys to the caves, and how she took some rusts and spent 2 nights in the caves with the saints. I'd pray to one, recite a little, and go to another. I'd doze, go again, and kiss the relics, and it was so quiet, dearie, so blissful, that I didn't even feel like going out into God's world. Pierre listened to her attentively and gravely. Prince Andrei left the room. And after him, Princess Marya left the people of God to finish their tea and took Pierre to the drawing room. You're very kind, she said to him. I really didn't mean to offend her. I understand those feelings and value them highly. Princess Marya silently looked at him and smiled tenderly. I've known you a long time and love you like a brother, she said. How do you find Andrei? She asked hastily, not giving him time to say anything to her affectionate words. He worries me very much. This winter his health has improved, but last spring his wound reopened, and the doctor said he should go abroad for treatment. And morally, I fear very much for him. He's not of the same character as us women who suffer and weep at our grief. He carries it inside him. Today he's merry and lively, but it's your arrival that has had that effect on him. He's rarely that way. If only you could persuade him to go abroad. He needs activity, and this regular, quiet life is ruining him. Others don't notice, but I see it. Towards 10 o'clock, the manservants rushed out to the porch, hearing the bells of the old prince's carriage as it drove up. Prince Andrei and Pierre also went out to the porch. Who's that? The old prince asked, getting out of the carriage and seeing Pierre. Ah, very glad. Kiss me, he said, on learning who the unknown young man was. The old prince was in good spirits and treated Pierre affectionately. Before supper, Prince Andrei, returning to his father's study, found the old prince in a hot dispute with Pierre. Pierre insisted that a time would come when there would be no more war. The old prince, mockingly, but without getting angry, argued with him. Drain the blood from their veins, put it in water, and there'll be no more war. Nonsense, old women's nonsense, he said. But even so, he patted Pierre affectionately on the shoulder and went over to his desk, where Prince Andrei, evidently unwilling to enter the conversation, was looking through the papers that the old prince had brought from town. The old prince went over to him and began talking about business. The marshal, Count Rostov, failed to produce half the men. He came to town and decided to invite me to dinner. I gave him a real dinner, and look at this one. Well, my boy, Prince Nikolai Andreich said to his son, slapping Pierre on the shoulder, Your friend's a fine fellow. I've come to love him. He fires me up. Another man talks cleverly, and you don't want to listen to him, but he talks nonsense, yet he fires me up, old as I am. Well, go, he said. Maybe I'll come and sit with you at supper, and argue again. Love my foolish Princess Maria. He called to Pierre from the door. Only now, during his visit to Bald Hills, did Pierre appreciate all the strength and charm of his friendship with Prince André. This charm expressed itself not so much in his relations with him as in his relations with the whole family and household, with the severe old prince and the meek and timid Princess Maria. Pierre felt like an old friend, though he barely knew them. They all loved him already. Not only did Princess Maria, won over by his meek attitude towards the wanderers, give him her most luminous looks, but the little one-year-old Prince Nikolai, as his grandfather called him, smiled at Pierre and went to his arms, and Mikhail Ivanitch and Mademoiselle Bourrienne looked at him with joyful smiles when he talked with the old prince. The old prince came out for supper. This was obviously for Pierre's sake. He was extremely affectionate with him on both days of his stay at Bald Hills and told him to come to visit. When Pierre left and all the members of the family came together, they began to discuss him, as always happens after the departure of a new person, and, as rarely happens, they said only good things about him. Section 15. Returning from leave this time, Rostov felt and realized for the first time how strong his bond with Denisov, his bond was with Denisov and the whole regiment. As Rostov approached the regiment, he experienced a feeling similar to what he had experienced on approaching his house at Povarovskaya, when he saw the first hussar in the unbuttoned uniform of his regiment, when he recognized the red-haired Dementiev, saw the red-coated horses at the tethering rail, when Larushka shouted joyfully to his master, "The Count's here!" and the disheveled Denisov, who had been asleep in bed, came running out of the dugout, embraced him, and the officers gathered around him. Rostov experienced the same feeling as when his mother, father, and sisters had embraced him, and the tears of joy that welled up in his throat prevented him from speaking. The regiment was also home, and a home as unchangingly dear and precious as his parental home. When he had reported to the regimental commander, had obtained an assignment to his former squadron, and had been on duty and gone foraging, had entered into all the little concerns of the regiment, and he felt himself deprived of freedom and bound with one narrow, unchanging frame, Rostov experienced the same peace, the same support, and the same awareness that here he was at home, where he belonged, as he felt under the parental roof. There was not all the disorder of the free world in which he found no place for himself and made wrong choices. There was no Sonia with whom he had, or did not have, to talk things over. There was no possibility of going or not going here or there. There were not those 24 hours in a day which could be spent in so many different ways. There was no numberless multitude of people, of whom no one was close, no one was distant. There was none of those unclear and undefined money relations with his father. There was no recollection of the terrible loss to Dolokhov. Here in the regiment, everything was clear and simple. The whole world was divided into two unequal parts. One was our Pavlogradsky regiment, the other, all the rest. And with this rest he had nothing to do. In the regiment, everything was known. Who was a lieutenant, who was a captain, who was a good and who was a bad man, and above all, who was a comrade. The sutler gives you credit, your salary comes 3 times a year, there is nothing to think up or choose between. Only do not do anything that is considered bad in the Pavlogradsky regiment. When you are sent out, do what is clearly and distinctly defined and ordered, and all will be well. Having entered once more into these definite conditions of regimental life, Rostov experienced a joy and peace similar to what a weary man feels when he lies down to rest. This regimental life was the more pleasurable for Rostov during this campaign, in that, after losing to Dolokhov, an act for which, despite all his family's reassurances, he could not forgive himself, he had resolved to serve not as before, but in order to smooth over his guilt, to serve well and be a perfectly excellent comrade and officer, that is, a fine human being, which seems so difficult in the world, but so possible in the regiment. Since the time of his gambling loss, Rostov was resolved to pay back the debt to his parents within 5 years. They used to send him 10,000 a year, but now he resolved to take only 2 and leave the rest to his parents in repayment of his debt. Our army, after repeated retreats, advances, and battles, around Pultusk and Prusich-Ilu, which was concentrated near Bartenstein. It was awaiting the arrival of the sovereign and the start of a new campaign. The Pavlogradsky regiment, belonging to that part of the army that had been in the 1805 campaign, had been replenishing its ranks in Russia and was late for the first actions of the campaign. It had not been at Pultusk nor at Prusich-Ilu, and joining the active army in the second half of the campaign was included in Platov's detachment. Platov's detachment acted independently of the army. Several times, parts of the Pavlogradsky regiment participated in exchanges of fire with the enemy, took prisoners, and once even captured the carriages of Marshal Oudinot. In the month of April, the regiment camped for several weeks near a totally devastated, empty German village, not budging from the spot. There was a thaw, mud, cold, the ice on the river broke up. The roads became impassable. For several days, provisions had not been issued either to the horses or to the men. Since transport became impossible, men scattered over the abandoned, desolate villages looking for potatoes, but found little even of them. Everything had been eaten, and the local people had all fled. Those who had stayed were worse than destitute. There was nothing to take from them, and the soldiers, little given to pity, often even gave them the last food they had instead of taking from them. The Pavlogradsky regiment lost only 2 men wounded in action, but it lost nearly half of its men to famine and disease. In the hospitals, death was such a certainty that soldiers sick with fever and bloated from bad food preferred to go on serving, forcing themselves to drag their feet to the front rather than go to the hospital. With the coming of spring, the soldiers began to find sprouting from the ground a plant resembling asparagus, which for some reason they called Mashka's sweet root, and they scattered over the meadows and fields hunting for this Mashka's sweet root, which was very bitter, digging it up with their sabers and eating it in spite of orders not to eat this noxious plant. In spring, a new disease broke out among the soldiers, a swelling of the hands, feet, and face, the cause of which the medics took to be the consuming of this root. But in spite of its prohibition, the Pavlogradsky soldiers of Denisov's squadron mostly ate Mashka's root, because for 2 weeks already the last supply of biscuits had been stretched. Each man received only half a pound per day, and the potatoes of the last shipment had frozen or sprouted. It was also the second week that the horses had been eating straw from the roofs of the houses. They were hideously skinny and still covered with their winter coat, which was matted in clumps. Despite such destitution, the soldiers and officers lived just as always. Now, too, though, with pale and swollen faces and tattered uniforms, the hussars lined up for roll call, did the cleaning, groomed the horses, polished their arms, pulled straw from the roofs to feed the horses, and sat down to eat around the cauldrons, going away hungry, joking about their vile food and their hunger. Just as always, in their time off from service, the soldiers made bonfires, steamed themselves naked by the flames, smoked, sorted, and baked the sprouted, fusty potatoes, and told or listened to stories about Potemkin's or Suvorov's campaigns, or tales about Alyosha the rogue and the priest's farmhand Mikolka. The officers, just as usual, lived 2 or 3 together in gaping, half-ravaged houses. The senior officers busied themselves with obtaining straw and potatoes and the means of nourishing the men in general. The lower ranks were taken up, as always, some with cards. There was plenty of money, though no provisions. Some with the harmless games of horseshoes and ninepins. There was little talk about the general course of the war, partly because nothing positive was known, partly because it was vaguely felt that the general business of the war was going badly. Rostov lived with Denisov as before, and their bond of friendship had become still stronger since their time on leave. Denisov never spoke about Rostov's family, but from the tender friendship which the commander showed his officer, Rostov felt that the elder hussar's unlucky love for Natasha played a part in the strengthening of their friendship. Denisov clearly tried to expose Rostov to danger as rarely as possible, protected him, and met him with particular joy when he returned from action safe and sound. During one of his missions in an abandoned, ravaged village, where he had gone for provisions, Rostov found a family made up of an old Pole, his daughter, and a nursing baby. They were poorly clothed, hungry, and could not leave, having no means of moving anywhere. Rostov brought them to the camp, placed them in his quarters, and kept them for several weeks while the old man was recovering. One of Rostov's comrades got to talking about women and began to tease Rostov, saying he was the cleverest of them all, that it would not be a bad thing if he introduced his comrade to the pretty Polish woman he had saved. Rostov took the joke as an insult, flared up, and said such unpleasant things to the officer that Denisov barely managed to keep them from a duel. When the officer left and Denisov, who did not know himself what Rostov's relations with the Polish woman were, began to rebuke him for being hot-tempered, Rostov said to him, "Think what you will, she's like a sister to me, and I can't describe to you how hurt I felt. Because, well, Denisov slapped him on the shoulder and quickly began pacing the room without looking at Rostov, something he did in moments of inner turmoil. "It's your crazy Rostov breed," he said, and Rostov noticed tears in Denisov's eyes. Section 16. In the month of April, the troops were enlivened by the news that the sovereign was coming to the army. Rostov did not manage to get to the review that the sovereign held in Bartenstein. The Pavlogradsky regiment was stationed at an outpost far forward of Bartenstein. They were on bivouac. Denisov and Rostov lived in a dugout covered with branches and turf that the soldiers had made for them. The dugout was made in the following way, which had then come into fashion. A trench was dug 4 feet wide, 5 feet deep, and 9 feet long. At one end of the dugout, steps were made. This was the way down, the entrance. The trench itself was the room in which the lucky ones, such as the squadron commander, had a board lying on 4 posts at the far end. This was a table. Along both sides of the trench, earth was removed to a width of 2.5 feet. This made 2 beds or couches. The roof was constructed in such a way that one could stand up in the middle, and one could even sit on the beds if one moved closer to the table. Denisov, who lived in luxury because of the soldiers of his squadron loved him, also had a board in the pediment of the roof with a piece of broken but mended glass set into it. When it was very cold, hot coals from the soldiers' bonfires were brought to the steps, the anteroom, as Denisov called this part of the shed, on a bent piece of sheet iron, and it became so warm that the officers, of whom there were always many with Rostov and Denisov, sat in nothing but their shirts. In the month of April, Rostov was on duty. Past 7 in the morning, coming home after a sleepless night, he ordered hot coals brought, changing his rain-soaked underclothes, said his prayers, drank some tea, got warmed, tidied things up in his little corner and on the table, and with a wind-burned face and nothing but his shirt, lay on his back with his hands behind his head. He thought pleasantly about the promotion he was supposed to receive one of those days for his last reconnoitering, and waited for Denisov, who had stepped out somewhere. Rostov wanted to talk with him. From behind the hut came the rolling sound of Denisov, obviously in a fit of temper. Rostov moved to the window to see whom he was dealing with, and saw Sergeant Major Topchenko. "I ordered you not to let them eat that fruit, mashchas or whatever," shouted Denisov. "I saw it myself. Lazarchuk was bringing some from the fields." "I ordered them, Your Honor. They don't obey," said the sergeant major. Rostov lay down again on his bed and thought with pleasure, "Let him fuss and bustle now. I've done my job and I'm lying down, and that's splendid." Through the wall he heard that, besides the sergeant major, Lavrushka, Denisov's pert and roguish lackey, was also talking. Lavrushka was telling something about some sort of wagons, biscuits, and oxen he had seen when he went for provisions. From behind the shed came the shouting of Denisov again, moving away. Excuse me. Wagons, biscuits, and oxen he had seen when. From behind the shed came the shouts of Denisov again, moving away, and the words, "Saddle up, second section." Where are they going? Rostov wondered. 5 minutes later, Denisov came into the shed, climbed onto the bed in his muddy boots, angrily smoked his pipe, scattered all his belongings around, strapped on his riding whip and saber, and started out of the dugout. To Rostov's question, where to, he answered angrily and vaguely that there was business to be done. "Let God and the great sovereign judge me for it," Rostov said as he went out, and Rostov heard the hooves of several horses splash through the mud behind the shed. Rostov did not even bother to find out where Denisov had gone. Having warmed up in his corner, he fell asleep and emerged from the hut only towards evening. Denisov had not come back yet. The evening turned clear. By the next dugout, 2 officers and a junker were pitching horseshoes laughing as the horseshoes struck in the loose, muddy soil. Rostov joined them. In the middle of the game, the officers saw some wagons driving up to them. They were followed by about 15 hussars on skinny horses. The wagons, with their hussar convoy, drove up to the tethering posts, and a crowd of hussars surrounded them. Well, so Denisov got all upset, said Rostov, and here come the provisions. Right you are, said the officers. The soldiers must be overjoyed. Denisov rode a little behind the hussars, accompanied by 2 infantry officers with whom he was talking about something. Rostov walked towards them. I warn you, Captain, said one of the officers, thin, small, and clearly very angry. I said I won't give them up, said Denisov. You'll answer for this, Captain. It's violence to seize your own army's transport. Our men haven't eaten for 2 days. And mine haven't eaten for 2 weeks, replied Denisov. It's highway robbery, my dear sir. You'll answer for it, the infantry officer repeated, raising his voice. And what are you bothering me for, eh? Shouted Denisov, suddenly flaring up. I'm the one who'll answer for it, not you, so stop buzzing around here while you're still in one piece. March, he shouted to the officers. All right then, shouted the little officer, not intimidated and not going away. This is highway robbery, so I'll march off to the devil. Quick step while you're still in one piece. And Denisov turned his horse towards the officer. All right, said the officer menacingly, and turning his horse, he rode off at a trot, bouncing in the saddle. A dog on a fence, a real live dog on a fence, Denisov said behind him, a cavalryman's highest mockery of an infantryman on horseback, and riding up to Rostov, he burst out laughing. I took it from the infantry, took the whole transport by force, he said. And what should people drop dead of hunger? The wagons were driven up to the hussars and had been intended for the wagons that were driven up to the hussars had been intended for an infantry regiment, but learning from Lavrushka that the transport was unescorted, Denisov and his hussars took it by force. The soldiers were given biscuits in plenty, and they even shared them with other squadrons. The next day, the regimental commander summoned Denisov and told him, covering his eyes with spread fingers, I look at it this way. I know nothing, and I will not start proceedings, but I advise you to go to the staff and settle matters there in the provisions department, and if possible to sign a receipt that you receive such and such provisions. In the contrary case, since the request was put in by the infantry regiment, proceedings could be started and might end badly. Denisov rode to the staff straight from the regimental commander with a sincere wish to follow his advice. In the evening he returned to the dugout in such a state as Rostov had never seen him. Denisov could not speak and was gasping for breath. When Rostov asked what the matter was with him, he was only uttered incomprehensible oaths and threats in a hoarse, weak voice. Alarmed by Denisov's state, Rostov suggested he should undress, drink some water, and send for the doctor. Mitchai for Baboy! Ach! Give me more water. Let them try me. But I'll beat the scoundrels. I'll always beat them. And I'll tell the sovereign. Give me ice, he kept murmuring. The regimental doctor came in and said it was necessary to bleed him. A deep dish of dark blood came from Denisov's shaggy arm, and only then was he able to tell what had happened to them. I arrived, Denisov told them. Well, where's your superior here? They point. Kindly wait. I have duties. I've ridden 20 miles. I have no time to wait. Announce me. Very good. This superior thief comes out and starts teaching me. This is robbery. Robbery, I say, is not when someone takes provisions to feed the soldiers, but when he takes them so as to line his pockets. Very good. Give your signature to the commissioner, he says, and your case will be passed on through the chain of command. I go to the commissioner. I enter. As the table sits, who do you think? No, just think. Who is it that's starving us? Denisov shouted, pounding the table with the fist of his just-lit arm so hard that the table almost fell and the glasses on it jumped. Terlinin, so it's you that are starving us to death. 1, 2, in the mug. They landed nicely. Ah, you, this, and that. And I started pummeling him. Anyhow, it was good fun, I can tell you, Denisov cried, baring his white teeth gleefully and spitefully under his black mustache. I'd have killed him if they hadn't pulled us apart. But what are you shouting for? Calm down, said Rostov. Here, you're bleeding again. Wait, your bandage should be changed. Denisov's bandage was changed and he was put to bed. The next day he woke up cheerful and calm. But at noon the regimental adjutant came with a grave and mournful face to Denisov and Rostov's dugout and regretfully showed them an official paper to Major Denisov from the regimental commander in which questions were raised about yesterday's occurrence. The adjutant informed them that the affair was bound to take a rather bad turn, that a court-martial had been appointed, and that, considering the present strictness about marauding and insubordination among the troops, in the best case the affair might end in demotion. The affair was presented by the offended side in such guise that, after seizing the transport, Major Denisov, uninvited, in a drunken state, appeared at the quartermaster general's, called him a thief, threatened him with a beating, and when removed, rushed into the office, attacked 2 clerks, and dislocated the arm of one. To Rostov's renewed questions, Denisov, laughing, said that it seems somebody else had turned up there, but it was all nonsense, trifles, and that he did not even dream of being afraid of any courts, and that if the scoundrels dared to provoke him, he would give them an answer they would remember. Denisov spoke disdainfully of the whole affair, but Rostov knew him too well not to notice that in his soul, concealing it from others, he was afraid of the trial and suffered after the affair, which was obviously going to have bad consequences. Every day papers of inquiry came, summonses from the court, and on the first day of May, Denisov was ordered to turn over command of the squadron to the next in seniority and report to the division staff for explanation of the case of violence in the Provisions Commission. On the eve of that day, Platov made a reconnaissance of the enemy with 2 Cossack regiments and 2 hussar squadrons. Denisov, as always, rode out in front of the line, showing his courage. A bullet fired by a French rifleman hit him in the fleshy upper part of the leg. Perhaps at another time, Denisov would not have left the regiment with such a slight wound, but now he took advantage of this chance, excused himself from appearing at the division, and went to the hospital. Section 17. In the month of June, the Battle of Friedland took place, in which the Pavlogradsky regiment did not participate, and after it a truce was declared. Rostov, who painfully felt his friend's absence, having no news of him since the time of his departure and worried about the course of his case and his wound, took advantage of the truce and obtained permission to visit Denisov in the hospital. The hospital was in a little Prussian village twice ravaged by Russian and French troops. Precisely because it was summer, when it was so pleasant in the fields, this little village, with its broken roofs and fences and its littered streets, was with ragged inhabitants and drunken or sick soldiers wandering about in it, presented an especially dismal sight. The hospital was housed in a stone building with a portion of its windows and window frames broken, which stood in a yard with the remnants of a dismantled fence. Several soldiers, bandaged, pale, and swollen, were walking about or sitting in the yard in the sun. As soon as Rostov went through the door of the house, he was enveloped by the stench of rotting flesh and hospital. On the stairs he met a Russian military doctor with a cigar in his mouth. The doctor was followed by a Russian assistant. "I can't tear myself in 2, said the doctor. "Come to make our Alexeyeviches in the evening. I'll be there." The assistant asked him about something else. Do it your way. Isn't it all the same?" The doctor saw Rostov coming up the stairs. "What do you want here, Your Honor?" asked the doctor. "What do you want here? The bullet missed you, so you want to catch typhus? This is a pest house, old boy." "How so?" asked Rostov. "Typhus, my lad. Anyone who comes in here is a dead man. There's only the 5 of us, me and Makiv," he pointed to the assistant, "still hanging on here. 5 of our fellow doctors have already died. A new one comes. After 1 little week he's finished," the doctor said with visible pleasure. "Prussian doctors were invited, but our allies don't find it to their liking." Rostov explained to him that he would like to see the hussar major, Denisov, who was a patient there. "I don't know, I can't say, my lad. Just think, I've got 3 hospitals to myself, 400 and some patients. It's a good thing some Prussian charitable ladies send us 2 pounds of coffee and a lint a month. Otherwise, we'd have perished," he laughed. 400, my lad, and they keep sending new ones." "It is 400, Ed," he turned to the assistant. The assistant looked exhausted. He was clearly waiting with vexation for the garrulous doctor to leave. "Major Denisov," Rostov repeated. "He was wounded at Moliten." "Seems he died, eh, Makiv?" the doctor asked the assistant indifferently. The assistant, however, did not confirm the doctor's words. "What, a tall man with reddish hair?" asked the doctor. Rostov described Denisov's appearance. There was one like that," the doctor said as if joyfully. "Must have died, but anyhow, I'll check. I had lists. Do you have them, Makiv?" "Makar Alexeich has the list," said the assistant. "But if you'd be pleased to go to the officer's ward, you can see for yourself there," he added, turning to Rostov. "You'd better not, my lad," said the doctor, or you may not wind up staying yourself. But Rostov took leave of the doctor and asked the assistant to accompany him. Just don't go blaming me, the doctor shouted from the bottom of the stairs. Rostov and the assistant went into the corridor. The hospital stench in this dark corridor was so strong that Rostov held his hand to his nose and had to stop and gather his strength to go further. A door to the right opened, and a thin yellow man on crutches stuck himself out, barefoot and in nothing but his underwear. Leaning against the doorframe, he looked at the passing men with glittering, envious eyes. Glancing through the door, Rostov saw sick and wounded men lying on the floor on straw and overcoats. What's this? He asked. The soldiers' wards, the assistant replied. Nothing to be done, he added, as if apologizing. May I go in and look? Asked Rostov. What's there to look at? Said the assistant. But precisely because the assistant obviously did not want to let him go in, Rostov entered the soldiers' wards. Here the stench, which he had managed to get used to in the corridor, was still stronger. The stench was slightly different. It was sharper, and one could sense that it was coming precisely from here. In the long room, brightly lit by the sun through the large windows, sick and wounded men lay in 2 rows, their heads against the walls, leaving a passage in the middle. Most of them were oblivious and paid no attention to the visitors. Those who were conscious all sat up or raised their thin yellow faces and fastened their eyes on Rostov with the same expression of hope for help, of reproach, and envy of another man's health. Rostov went to the middle of the room, glanced into the next 2 rooms through the open doors, and on both sides he saw the same thing. He stopped, silently looking around him. He had never expected to see what he saw. Right in front of him, almost across the middle of the passage, on the bare floor lay a sick man, probably a Cossack, because his hair was square cut. This Cossack lay on his back, his huge arms and legs spread. His face was purple red, his eyes were completely rolled up so that only the white showed, and the veins on his bare feet and arms, also red, were taut as ropes. He struck his head on the floor and said something hoarsely and started repeating a word. Rostov listened to what he said and figured out the word he was repeating. This word was drink, drink, drink. Rostov looked around, hoping to find someone who could put this patient in his place and give him some water. Who looks after the patients here? He asked the assistant. Just then, a commissariat soldier, a hospital attendant, came out of the next room and, stamping his feet, snapped to attention in front of Rostov. Good day to you, Your Honor, sir, the soldier shouted out, rolling his eyes at Rostov and obviously taking him for a hospital superior. Take him away, give him water, Rostov said, pointing to the Cossack. Yes, sir, Your Honor, the soldier said with pleasure, rolling his eyes and drawing himself up still more zealously, but not budging from his place. No, there's nothing to be done here, thought Rostov, lowering his gaze, and he was already about to leave, but he felt a meaningful gaze directed at him from the right and turned to look. Almost in the corner, on an overcoat, sat an old soldier with a yellow, stern face, gaunt as a skeleton, and an unshaven gray beard, looking fixedly at Rostov. The old soldier's neighbor on one side was whispering something to him, pointing to Rostov. Rostov understood that the old man meant to ask him something. He went closer and saw that only one of the old man's legs was bent under him. The other was missing, above the knee. The old man's other neighbor, who was lying without moving, his head thrown back some distance from him. The old man's other neighbor, who lay without moving, his head thrown back some distance from him, was a young soldier with a waxen pallor on a snub nose, still freckled face, and only the whites of his eyes showing. Rostov looked at this snub-nosed soldier, and a chill ran down his spine. But this one seems to be, he turned to the assistant. We've been asking, Your Honor, said the older soldier, his lower jaw trembling. He passed away this morning. We're people, too, not dogs. I'll send someone at once, and he'll be taken away, the assistant said hastily. If you please, Your Honor. Let's go, said Rostov hastily, and lowering his eyes and shrinking, he tried to pass unnoticed through the line of those reproachful and envious eyes directed at him as he left the room. And that will be where we will end for today. Pretty bleak conditions in the Russian troops. Many of them are dying from famine and hunger and disease rather than just actual fighting. So yeah, we'll stop there for today. So yay, folks, we are about a third of the way through the book now. Pretty exciting. Yeah, war is hell. Yeah. And sorry, we kind of started a little abruptly and jerkily today. I started the stream before I intended to, so. But if you missed anything, you can always go back and watch it. I will have it up on the War and Peace playlist where you can catch up on any other readings. Check out some of the links I will add. Like I said, I'm going to be adding a link to a list of Black-owned businesses. So if you're looking for, if you have to do some shopping and you're looking for a way to support local businesses or small businesses, take a look at these, the list that I'll be putting up on there. Thank you all. Stay safe, and we will see you tomorrow.